Reese's peanut butter cups are the greatest, but let me play devil's advocate here. Let's see. So, no, that's a good thing. That's definitely not a problem. Reese's, you did it. You stumped this charming devil.
Hello, this is international football commentator Derek Ray, and you're listening to the Ranks FC podcast.
Hello Ranks Squad and welcome to Ranks FC. It's your favourite transatlantic football podcast. My name is Jack Collins and I will be your host today. And joining me across the water from San Diego, it's our transfer guru, Mr. Dean Jones. How you doing, mate?
Hello, mate. Yeah, I'm very good, thank you. Of course I'm good. The transfer window is closed, so I'm now back to being a different version of myself, one that... my family probably prefer, but it's nice to have a little bit more freedom in my head. I think that it was a good transfer window, unless you were maybe an Arsenal fan and didn't get that forward that you thought could have been transformative, I guess, to what you were trying to do. I was obviously deep in it on deadline day, and working on it from San Diego meant I was up from about 4 a.m. It was fine, it was quite exciting the first few hours that I was up because all the Matthias Tell stuff was kicking off and things like that. But that Arsenal forward just never surfaced. And yesterday I did a podcast for Give Me Sport, and it's halfway through the day, and I was doing it with Joel Bayer, who just kept asking me over and over again, but who are Arsenal signing? And what about Arsenal? And then he asked Fabrizio, and he asked Ben Jacobs, and everyone was like, they're not doing anything, mate. Like, they are not doing anything. And I think he reflected, or he said he reflected anyway, how Arsenal fans are feeling, in that they had an opportunity to go and try and win the league. And the feeling of that fan base, I think, will be, why didn't we go for it? Why have we let this moment pass? And I think, obviously, they had an inquiry about Ollie Watkins, but was that to just placate people? I don't know. I don't really know what they tried to get out of inquiring over a £40 million bid for Ollie Watkins that was never going to happen. And obviously, you can say, well,
after a John Duran bid was accepted earlier in that day.
Yeah, it's true. And obviously, this still opens the door to them to go and do something massive in the summer. And that's what I kept saying. Well, now you can go and do massive in the summer. He's like, but we need it now. We needed this now, because if we could go and win the league, if we have someone that can score us goals and is better at finishing than Kai Havertz in key moments. And I understand the point, but Arsenal were only going to do something if it was guaranteed to work or guaranteed to be better than everything else they had. I don't think that person was really there at the end for them, and they've just decided to go with what they've got. They have just scored 5 goals against Man City, and none of them were from set pieces. So maybe they're improving, but we'll see.
Yeah, I also don't know if, the players on the table, even an Ollie Watkins, who I think is an excellent footballer, is that the thing that drives Arsenal over the line? Is Ollie Watkins the person that pushes Arsenal to overtake Liverpool this season? I don't know. We'll never know. But I have my doubts whether that is, as much as Ollie Watkins is excellent, if that's the thing that would push Arsenal over the line this season. Maybe next year. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe a player in that mould, fine from the start, but maybe not in January. I mean, look, we're gonna talk about the entirety of the transfer window today via your lens. But I did want to ask you before we got into that: did you sleep better last night, given the fact that you didn't have to wake up to check your phone every hour?
Yeah, it was definitely a less anxiety-ridden night. It's just been weird. It's mostly fine when you're working on a different time zone, but during the transfer window, you obviously have that fear of missing a message or missing a transfer or maybe getting something wrong that's gone out while you then go to sleep. Like, typically, I'm usually awake till about, 11 p.m.-ish San Diego time, which is about 7 a.m. UK time. So we're usually in that sort of distance. So I usually know how the day is beginning in the UK, but obviously a lot can happen in the next 5 or 6 hours. And yeah, so those hours of sleep aren't very comfortable, let's just say, especially as you get a bit deeper into the window. But it was fine. It was fine. I tried to be mindful, Jack. I had a bit of mindfulness. Obviously, I did dry Jan, which was definitely helpful. That's. I'm still. In fact, I'm in
Dry
4
Feb.
days into dry Feb. I'm not sure that will last, but it's been nice. So yeah, it was good. But yeah, in this episode, in the main segment, I'm going to talk about some of the juiciest stuff from the window, like the teams that really have come out of this well, the players that we think have come out of it well or could come out of it well, some of the biggest deals. But I think just before we get to that section, there's a few intriguing ones that I really want to know how these play out. One that I think will work and that really does need to work is Evan Ferguson to West Ham. West Ham have a terrible track record with number nines. Like, they are either diabolical or they get injured immediately. And so bringing in a nine like Ferguson certainly lifts the optimism for now around West Ham. It's exactly what they need. He's got the manager he needs too. So I do like that signing a lot. And I just hope he's treated carefully in the first few games, because he hasn't played a lot recently. And I think this is one of the things that was off-putting for other teams. So treat him with kind hands, West Ham, and then get the rest of the season out of him, because this could be a really good signing, even in FPL, by the way. 5.5 million Evan Ferguson in fantasy is potentially a really good pick. So I like that one. Certainly intrigued by it. Patrick Dorgu at Man United, I'm very intrigued by, especially as he was the only significant thing that happened for them in terms of incomings. It's obviously a subject which we brought up at the beginning of the window. Like, Man United need one of the teams that need to win the transfer window. They definitely didn't do that. No. One of the things that I hammered home in that episode was the only thing I can guarantee you that they're prioritising is a left wing back, and that's what will happen, and anything else, I don't know. I mean, I didn't think there wouldn't be anything else, but pretty much where we're at. So he's got to be he's got to completely transform this team.
He's got to be transformative for Manchester United. That's holding him in very high regard. And look, I like Patrick Dorgu, but bear in mind he has played most of this season playing right wing for Lecce and occasionally at right back. For him to come in and be transformative to Manchester United's left side is going to be very, very interesting. I think he has a physical profile for it. I think that ultimately what they've seen in him is someone who will be able to fit in to what Amorim wants. I have my doubts in terms of how raw he is right now, that he's going to be an immediate success and he's going to be the person that changes everything immediately for Manchester United. But I do see where they're going with this kind of deal. And I think that's probably something that you can take to an extent as a United fan, that you can kind of be like, okay, I can see what they're doing. And look, we will talk about the Matthias Tell deal later, I'm sure. But the fact that United decided they weren't going to do that because they couldn't at the time, obviously things changed, but couldn't get a buy clause at the end of it. They didn't want to be, basically helping someone else along the road for another club that they, weren't going to benefit from long term. They didn't want to pay 5 million euros to do so. You know what? In some ways, quite sensible, and something that United wouldn't have done in years gone past. So if they are skirting closer to these FFP and PSR regulations, and they've decided that they're actually going to just hold fire for a little bit and try to work with what they've got, they've addressed, as you say, the main area of concern. I still have, problems with their centre midfield lineup, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how that develops over the course of the season. But they did go out and get someone who was a main target in the area that Ruben Amorim prioritised. And I think that has to be seen as a positive from a United perspective, because they've decided not to go and just blast money everywhere for the sake of doing so.
Well, they didn't have it. That's why. Probably would have if they had it, but they didn't. They didn't even really have much for loan fees. So this is where they're at, and they've made one good signing, I guess. And now we'll see what they can get out of this season. I mean, I would be extremely alarmed. The fact that they let two attackers go, started at the weekend with their two other main forwards in Xerxes and Højlund on the bench, and decided to play Kobbie Mainoo as the false nine. I mean, I don't think that that's a particularly good idea for the rest of the
No,
season.
me neither, for what it's worth. But like, I can see the experiment and why there was an experiment to an extent.
Yeah, it didn't work. But yeah, let's see. But Dorgu, needs to have a big impact on that team. The third player that I'm really intrigued by, we've already been able to see this guy a few times at Wolves, is Emmanuel Agbadou. This guy signed for £16 million from Reims, Ivory Coast, 27 years old. This guy has made such an impact on me.
He
love
looks
him.
really good.
He is so good. Like, this is such a good signing from Wolves. And like when I saw him play, even in his first game, I think they lost, maybe Chelsea. I was like, this guy's good. This guy's really good. And then he played the game against Villa where they won 2-0.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, I think I'm pretty convinced on this guy. If this is their sort of strategy going forward, then Wolves have got some seriously good scouting going on. But I think, like, it won't be long. If this is how he plays consistently, I mean, he'll be at like Chelsea or something before you know it. Like, this looks a remarkably good, strong, comfortable player in the Premier League to have made his impact this quickly.
Yeah, he looks really good on the ball. I mean, they bought two players from Lem in the end.
They did.
They bought Marshall Manetzi very, very late as a midfielder. And apparently they're very good friends. So there's that to think about when they're looking at their transfer strategy. But yeah, if he's half the player that Agbadou has showed in his first couple of games, then Wolves have done very, very well.
Won the transfer window. Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was smart. To be honest, I have liked what Wolves have done here. They've been quite smart. And obviously, it's still going to be a little bit of a scrap, I imagine, in terms of making sure that everything ticks along in the same way. But they bought Nasha Giga as well from Red Star Belgrade. Sverna Zvezda, as we called him on the Champions League takeaway show, who has had some very interesting performances of his own. So actually, generally, I think quite a smart window from Wolves, considering that there was a lot of panic beforehand. They ended up signing Mateus Cunha to a new deal as well. I think that a lot of Wolves fans will be very pleased with the way that this window has turned out. Just on something slightly different to finish this, and two deals to the same club that I'm hugely intrigued by as well. Milan have brought in Santi Jimenez to replace Alvaro Morata, who went off to Galatasaray. Gave him Morata's shirt straight away. I was like, there you go, there's the 7. You're in. Off you go. And then brought Joao Felix to play behind him as well. They also brought in Ricardo Sotil, who's been good but inconsistent, I think, at Fiorentina for a couple of years. Their wing options now are very, very strong, Milan, in that they ended up not losing Chukwueze. They have kept Pulisic, who obviously sometimes plays in the 10 as well. Joao Felix can now play in the 10. Yunus Musa has played on the right-hand side of that midfield. And on the other side now, they have Leao and they have Sotil. You're suddenly looking at that and thinking, that's a very, very strong rotation policy that you got there. And then Santi Jimenez and Tammy Abraham to play in that number 9 role as well. I like that from a Milan perspective. And I think Jimenez is going to be a success. I think he was going to be a success really wherever he went. He has the profile for it. He has the temperament, I think, to go and succeed as well. And I was wondering who was going to be the person that really did put their foot down and go for Santi Jimenez. But I think that what they have now there in their front four and then the backup front four that they've got going as well is very, very intriguing. So I'm going to be keeping an eye, if we didn't already, on Milan over the course of this season. The only question, I suppose, is so much of what's been good about Milan has gone through Christian Pulisic, whether he's been playing out on the right or through that 10 over the course of this season. And now Joao Felix comes in, obviously countryman to Sergio Conceição, although one of them is Porto and the other one is Benfica, and there's always a little bit of needle between those two. I'm quite intrigued to see what that looks like, whether Pulisic gets shunted out more to the right. Maybe they're just trying to manage him a little bit better, considering the injuries that he's suffered, not just this season, but in the years before. But I'm excited to see what this Milan looks like. And look, seeing Joao Felix's smile at San Siro, he grew up supporting Milan, grew up with Kaká as his idol. There's a lot to like about that move, I think, from Joao Felix's perspective, if it does pay off.
Yeah, sexy football. That's what's on the cards here, mate. This is pure Milan. I love it.
It's going to be interesting. Conceição's back four just being absolutely rock solid and then being like, off you go to the front four, go and play some football, go and do some fun things. So,
yeah, well, Kyle Walker in there as well, obviously. And he's off to a good start, Kyle Walker, despite my reservations about him as a footballer right now. So, yeah, we'll see.
We will indeed. All right, we're going to come on to some clubs more so than players after the break, when we'll be looking at a couple of the transfers and the clubs who have defined this January window. Don't go anywhere.
Why are there ridges on Reese's peanut butter cups? Probably so they never slip from her hands. Could you imagine? I'd lose it. Luckily, Reese's thought about that. Wonder what else they think about. Probably chocolate and peanut butter.
Welcome back to Ranks FC. It's time to dive a little bit deeper into this January transfer window. And to do so, I'm going to hand the floor to our transfer guru, Mr. Dean Jones.
Yeah, so on this ranking, it'll be under an umbrella of the teams, but it gives us an opportunity to discuss loads of different profiles of players that have moved and whether we like them or not, basically. And I'm going to start by talking about the team that had the most radical window. And this is Aston Villa. I mean, what they've been through in the last month is mad. Absolutely incredible. So obviously the highlight of the outgoings is John Duran, who ends up playing in Saudi Arabia after being bought for 77 million euros. Huge amount of money for Duran, an amount of money that Aston Villa couldn't turn down. Not really a risk for Villa because he's not going to be coming up against them at any point. So it doesn't really matter to them. Like, out of sight, out of mind, but loads of money in the bank. Lovely. Others go out. Emi Buendia, Philogene goes off to Ipswich for 20 million. Diego Carlos leaves. And then there's even, obviously, some angst around losing Ollie Watkins, which was a bit of a dilemma at one point. And they're like, oh my goodness, what's happening here? We don't know if to be excited or scared. Like, what's going on? And the reason they might be excited was because of the other stuff they were doing on the other side of this. So you're losing Duran, who's been proven to be one of the most clinical forwards in the game, and most certainly the most impactful forwards in the Premier League. But you look at their incomings, and they signed Marcus Rashford, Asensio, Daniel Marlon. They signed, I don't know anything about Garcia from Levante, but they did sign someone called Garcia from Levante. And then they round it all off.
And he'll be absolutely fine, although probably not a starter for the time being.
Okay. And they round it all off with the bizarre move that I don't understand why they've done it, is for Axel Disasi. So it's all a bit of a madness. But obviously the headline out of it is like, well, Duran's gone, and that's quite a big loss. But we've got Rashford and Asensio and Marlon to basically make up for it. And I don't know exactly where I sit with any of that. If I was to rank it, then I like Asensio the most. And I'm least convinced about Rashford. But I can understand partly why you took the risk. Mainly because you just got 70 odd million for John Duran, so you got a bit of money to play with. But it's absolutely mind-blowing. Obviously, I've read some of the analysis around it, and it's clearly they're having a push here, obviously into the Champions League now in the knockout stages, and they're rejigging their squad for that and getting in some clout up front to make sure that they've always got enough goals in this team. I really don't know what to make of it, mate. I mean, Marlon, he's in and out, isn't he? I'd put him in the same kind of bracket as other players that they've already got, probably like a Leon Bailey, who on his day is magic, and when he's not on his day, he might as well not be there. Is that fair? Am I being too harsh? I don't know, but
no, I don't think you are. I feel a bit for Daniel Marlon, right? Because he came in earlier in the window and he would have been given certain assurances. He could have looked at this Villa team and thought, yeah, you know what? I feel like
guaranteed
I can work out a start here. Obviously, I'll have to work my way through a couple of players, but there's probably space for me to get involved. And he's looking at it on Deadline David they just signed Marcus Asensio and Marcus Rashford. I was like, where on earth am I going to play? But yeah. Look, I like Daniel Marlon, but I have concerns with his consistency. I think that Villa probably saw a market opportunity and thought they would grab it. And then later on in the window, they've seen better market opportunities come along and they've gone, well, we've got to take advantage of those as well. So how this actually shakes out and the amount of minutes he gets here in this sort of second half of the season is a question mark. To kind of counter that, I suppose there is an element of they own Donyell Marlon, and therefore they will want him to at least hold value or move forward. And I think he was a little bit unlucky at the weekend in terms of not getting on the score sheet. But when all of that comes together, I'm intrigued by this window. What I am most interested in this window, I think, from Villa, is it feels like they've had the window that they should have had in the summer. So they get into the Champions League last year. They moved from the Conference League to the Champions League. Everyone's very excited. They're absolutely brilliant in the Premier League over the course of last season, right? And everyone in the summer goes, cool, what are Villa going to do? And they sort of go backwards, right? I think that it's not being unfair to suggest that the Villa took a step backwards in the summer. They had to shift players around for various PSR reasons. They had to flip lots of players in terms of who came in and who went out. We saw them lose Douglas Luiz. And I think when they started this season, this squad was probably a tad lighter than it was, during the course of last season when they were playing Conference League football. And they've dealt with that relatively well, especially in the Champions League. They have had drop-offs in domestic games post-Champions League fixtures. I don't think any Villa fan would argue with that. And we saw another one, obviously, at the weekend where they lose to Wolves after having a big Champions League moment in midweek where they end up qualifying. So I think they're probably looking for some depth in this window, but I think Villa fans probably expected them to go and make a couple of whoa, that's a big signing. That's an exciting signing in the summer. And none of them hugely came in. And then suddenly you fast forward to January and you go, wow, Marcus Asensio, who is a 3 times Champions League winner who scored goals in Champions League finals, is playing for the club. Marcus Rashford, who 18 months ago, if I told you that Marcus Rashford would be on loan from Manchester United to Aston Villa, you would have called for the men in white coats, right? As bad as perhaps this form has been this season, there is still an incredibly talented player in Marcus Rashford. And you're thinking, okay, this is the window that people were expecting Villa to have in the summer. Now, how does that work with them kicking on? Are they going to be able to push on in the league? Is this going to give them the depth that they need to actually move forwards? And where does that leave them at the end of this season? But I think generally, this has been the window that Villa fans would have been dreaming of 6 months ago.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks good on paper, doesn't it? Yeah, and I think when Duran's acceptable, and the fact that he's not going to be coming against you, and you got a lot of money for him, so that's okay. It's the Rashford factor that I'm finding really hard to calculate in my head as to whether this is good or bad for either of them, really. So Rashford hasn't started a game since 1st of December. That's when he got his last goals as well. He scored 2 goals and a 4-0 win over Everton. Obviously, came out of an interview with Henry Winter and said he needed a new challenge. And I think he thought his new challenge was going to be Barcelona or maybe AC Milan or something like that. I don't think he ever thought it was going to be Aston Villa. But obviously, he's ended up with a decent level of team. In some respects, it's a climb down in terms of the size of the club, but in terms of the way that Aston Villa play compared to Man United, he's joining a better team. And this is where I struggle to rationalise it in my head, because Marcus Rashford, the version that we've seen of him...
Rashfordalise it in your head.
Rashfordalise. He's not good enough to play for Aston Villa at the moment. We haven't seen all
at
season...
At the moment being the operative phrase, right?
But at the moment, so he's initially on loan with a £40 million option, right? So how long does it take Rashford to come to life at Aston Villa? Bear in mind, he hasn't played football for 2 months, right? He hasn't even been training with the squad. So there's no way I can see him hitting the ground running. And by the way, I hope I'm wrong on this. I'm not trying to do a rash bash here. Like, I'm really not. But I am having to dress this up exactly as it is. And
how you see it. Also, I did say, I will just counter it quickly, in that we were talking about a potential Barcelona move a couple of weeks ago, right? And one of the things I said about that was that, yeah, okay, right now, I don't see why Barcelona would move for that. But I wonder if just a new set of circumstances, moving outside of a comfort zone, having to prove yourself and earn your spot in a team once again, just start to freshen something up for Marcus Rashford, allow him to just play with a little bit more freedom than he's experienced in the last I'd say couple of months, but maybe 18 months at Manchester United, and just give him that opportunity to go, you know what, fresh start, I come in here and I prove my worth. Is that something we've seen it with Jesse Lingard at West Ham, right? Couldn't fight his way into that Manchester United team for love nor money, and then suddenly turned up at West Ham and was immediately impactful. Now, it's not quite the same in that I think you're right in that Rashford is moving up to a team who are currently better as an all-round and cohesive unit than Manchester United are. But we've seen players come out of there and suddenly just feel like they're breathing the free air again all of a sudden and get that second wind, that lease of life once again.
Yeah, completely take your point. I mean, one of the most alarming things for me that happened immediately on the back of the transfer was a story that came up saying Marcus Rashford will not move house as part of this. Like, he's going to continue to live in Manchester. I'm like, that completely defeats the point here. He's supposed to be changing environment. He's supposed to be changing the conditions. Like, having a regular journey from Manchester to Birmingham ain't going to be helping him anytime soon. Now, I hope that
train is bad as well. I've been on it a few times. It takes ages.
Like, it doesn't even matter if, like, yes, people are like, but he's in a chauffeur-driven car. I don't care. Like, if he's actually going to make that journey, you're sitting in a car for, I don't know, an hour and a half. I'm guessing, but it's got to be about that.
It's just shy of that, but it's about an hour and a quarter. But like, also just rent a gaff in like outskirts of Birmingham. Go to Edgbaston. It's well nice.
I just want to see him commit and dedicate himself to this. That's what I want to see, because spending that much time in a car wouldn't be helping. Now, I hope that this just means like he's still planning to live generally in Manchester, but he'll stay in Villa and he'll have a hotel room throughout his stay, and he will check in and out of that as and when. Like, I assume,
pretty reasonable, yeah.
I assume that that's what's actually going to happen. I can't imagine that Marcus Rashford is genuinely going backwards and forwards from Bodymore Heath to Manchester every day. Like, I hope that's not right. Because the only way this works if his head is completely on it here. And I saw Wayne Rooney talking about him the other day, and he said he's even said to Rashford, you need to leave Man United, you need to leave Manchester, you need to change your environment. And I just hope he is changing his environment here, because just playing in a different team isn't going to be that helpful, because he's turning up in a team that, in terms of attacking threat, like, they have Watkins, now they have Marlon, and they have Asensio, and they have Leon Bailey, and they also have Jacob Ramsey, and they also have Morgan Rogers. And he's got to go in there and show these guys like what it takes to be at the level he's been at. And like, I'm just saying, none of them have going to be there or
I know.
But Marcus Rashford has a superstar status attached to him, rightly or wrongly, right? And he's got to step up to that. Obviously, there's been loads of analysis of his appearance in the picture. And the only thing I've found really, I don't really care how. I hope Marcus Rashford is totally grand, or I hope he's fine, right? But I do appreciate.
I hope he's great.
Yeah, but I appreciate in those photos he didn't look great. Like, he hadn't done his hair looked all over the place. He hadn't shaved, and people are going to pick up on that. And I listened to Darren Bent on TalkSport, just talking about this, and like Darren Bent or not, like, he's been a top level footballer and he knows the inner workings of how it all goes on. And he just said, he goes, I just can't get my head around the fact that Marcus Rashford hasn't had a trim before he's made this move. It's like, it's the one thing like you do in this situation is you're like, my photo is going to be everywhere. I've got to make a good impression here on everybody. And he said the first thing you do is you get your barber on the phone. And bear in mind, footballers have their hair cut like every 3 days anyway, normally, right?
Yeah,
and
also, it's not with Marcus Rashford like it was a last minute, you've got to move this second. This has been a long and protracted process, right?
So, again, hopefully this is nothing. But
yeah, I'm not going to judge him on his haircut, but
I don't want to, but it just was another just slightly concerning element of it was that he didn't look $1 million. And I think that we'd all like Rashford to get back to it. It's been quite a journey the last few days. Like, if you look at social media, of the montages. Like United fans they've been kind of chewed up by this because they do love Rashford, and they're kind of reminiscing about, you're seeing all the montages of like the breakthrough, the goals, the smiles, the shy boy breaking out into a man, and you're watching it all happen. You saw him come through the youth team. He was like, he made you want to smile.
Yeah.
Like, I was watching these clips, and Rashford made you want to smile. It gave you goosebumps at times, like the goals that he would score, the way he would celebrate, the joy that he felt playing football. It really was contagious. And then as you see some of the other montages of what he's become, it's quite sad. And I think it must be really, really difficult to rediscover the motivation and drive that you had then that was completely pure. That was completely pure
Untainted.
ambition. Yeah. And so he's somehow, obviously his goal celebration is all about pointing to his head and talking about mindset, right? Like, he's got to show elite mindset right now. Like, let's see that goal celebration soon, Rashford. This is the most interesting transfer from the Premier League, that without doubt for me, because it's bold, it's a gamble, yet it's exciting, yet it's worrying, and I don't know where I sit with it, but yeah, it's going to be the one that gets the biggest scrutiny, and that also alarms me because one of the reasons I wanted him to go abroad was so that he didn't have the spotlight on him, and he's still going to have it.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see how he goes, but best of luck to Marcus Rashford, and obviously
That's a big Rashford bit, wasn't it?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, look, I would argue that I'm probably more intrigued by the Marco Asensio thing, right?
I mean, yeah, for sure. Where does he play though? Where's Asensio fit in?
I don't know, which is why this is all really interesting, and actually I think that the Villa have made some intriguing signings. I think that obviously at the moment they look really light at centre-back. Axel Disasi going in there is someone who has been given another one a bit of a hard time at Chelsea, not necessarily unfairly. He's been
terrible.
poor at times. Like, I do think that, Unai Emery, we joke quite a lot, over on the Fulham kind of end of things about Marco Silva's rejuvenation clinic, right? And the fact that players come in who everyone had written off and suddenly they look like they're playing the best football of their career under Marco Silva. And it's a great thing. But Emery has a bit of a track record for this as well, for taking unwanted players, for taking cast-offs, for want of a better word, and turning them into something better. Not necessarily at Aston Villa, but generally, I think throughout his career as a manager. And he's got a job on his hands here, because this is a Marco Asensio who, okay, didn't fit in tactically all that well with what Luis Enrique was trying to do with PSG. But that doesn't necessarily add up, right? Because actually Marco Asensio was a really key part of what Luis Enrique tried to do with Spain. So, it's not necessarily that he suddenly can't do the things that Luis Enrique is saying. And obviously there are going to be differences between the way that PSG set up and the way that Spain team set up. But the fact that Asensio was a pretty key part of that and has been shunted out the exit door for being, surplus to requirements intrigues me. This is a player who Zinedine Zidane said had the best left foot since Messi. And we're seeing him, not being able to make his way in what is a very good PSG side, let's be honest. But also it brings in some experience to Villa, in terms of the Champions League, in terms of the Champions League knockout stages. I think it's going to be intriguing. I don't know how many minutes he ends up getting. I wonder if he ends up being a player who makes impacts off the bench. But I am intrigued by it, and I think it's a really intriguing deal. So I'm excited to see how all of this fits together. I'm excited to see what this does with Emery's system, his strategy, if Villa play slightly differently with all these new additions. But mostly I'm just sort of waiting with bated breath to see what it all looks like.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. By the way, Aston Villa go to Man United on the last day of the season. Now, obviously, Rashford won't be able to play in that game. But it's interesting, right? Maybe if things have gone well, he just decides to go along to the game anyway and see what kind of reception
around
he is.
the pitch.
Yeah. Well, he's got to say his goodbyes at some point. Man United are going to sell him one way or the other.
In summer?
Right, let's move over to the other side of Manchester, because I want to talk about the most transformative team of this transfer window, and it's absolutely, for my liking, Manchester City.
Wolves.
Yeah, maybe. But in terms of the outlay here, almost £200 million in the end that Manchester City got to. They got rid of their worst player in Kyle Walker, complete liability. made it clear once he realised, I think, that he needed to go, that he had to go, and told Pep, and Pep didn't stand in his way. And he's got himself a move to AC Milan.
And then they didn't replace him.
They didn't replace him, although they did look at signing a fullback in Cambiasso, and I think they'll go back for him in the summer. But it's fine because they got Mateus Nunes, who's doing a grand job as a right back. But City did sign 3 defenders, Kusanov, Vitoris and Juma Bar. Juma Bar obviously won't be seen for now, as he's a City group signing. He's playing elsewhere for now.
That's a mental story, by the way. The fact that he bought out his own contract and just left Valladolid. I mean, his rise is wild as well, but the buying out of his own contract to sign elsewhere is an absolutely nutty story.
Yeah, I think football's changing, isn't it? It's pretty crazy. But yeah, they've got really high hopes for what he can become, seeing how quickly he's risen. I mean, if you don't know about Juma Bar's rise, then go and look it up. We won't go into it now, but yeah, some good readings to be had about how quickly he has ended up at this elite level. Kusanov is the one that we'll be seeing the most. Obviously, he had an absolute disaster of a debut, but there's a reason.
For the first 5 minutes, anyway.
Well, his debut only lasted 50 minutes, so...
it's only 10%. I'll give him a bit of the benefit of the doubt.
I mean, I wouldn't say that he got that much better. I felt sorry for him, but it was heading for Jonathan Woodgate territory at one point in terms of that debut. I was like, just sub him, just get him off. But Kusanov will be fine. Like, he's going to go through difficult moments, but he's going
to be grand.
He'll be fine. But obviously, the 2 most significant ones are Omar Mamouche, who we've already seen play for Manchester City, who is going to be a very good signing. And they finally, I don't know why they waited until deadline day to do this, because they really needed this one 4 weeks ago. But they've signed the defensive midfielder that does transform everything. They got Nico Gonzalez. And I do want to hear from you more, because I know that you'll know more about him than I do. But the fact he had a release clause gave City enthusiasm to go for him, because it meant that he was gettable. They knew that there was negotiating that could make it happen, and they got him. Now, I spoke to someone yesterday just to find out a bit more about, whether they really believed in this player. They were like, they actually love him. They love him, and Pep's known him for a long, long time. Obviously, he came up through Barcelona, and I believe that Pep and Cheeky still have good relations with his dad. So they've always been aware of his...
Pep would have played against his dad, right? His dad was a legend for Deportivo La Coruña and those Super Depor sides, Fran Gonzalez, earlier in the early 2000s. Serious footballer, but very, very different to his son.
Yeah, and so once I started to hear the background of it, I was like, oh, okay, like this is no like sudden thing. Like they've more than aware of everything about this player. And when you hear about his profile and his playing style and his stature, and also the fact that even when Rodri comes back, they believe that this guy can stay in the team.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I mean, I think this is the key point, right? That actually what we've seen from Nico Gonzalez so far is that he's incredibly versatile in terms of his skill set. I am a little bit wary of naming him the heir to sorting out all of Manchester City's problems, because I think there are elements in his game, and look, they might be ironed out by Pep Guardiola. Parts of them have already been ironed out at Porto, because he's had to do some different things to what he grew up at. But a lot of people are like, oh, he's the Busquets heir. He's the player that's going to go and do that. And he's not hugely like that, or at least he very much wasn't at Barcelona. He liked to get the ball deep and drive. And one of the things I think the City would have found very interesting about his profile is that he can play both as a 6 and an 8. Now, he's got a rangy player. He's tall, quite well built. I think he's 6'3". So he's not going to be shrugged off the ball particularly easily, but he has that technical ability that you would expect from a player who's come out of La Masia. He likes to receive the ball. He can deal with under pressure. it's interesting to see how City deploy him, because one of the things he's been best at is actually covering ground. Like, he'll take the ball in the middle of the park and just beat a player and off he'll go. And I'm not 100% sure that's what City need right now. They don't need someone else who's going to drive through the middle of the park. I think they need someone who's going to sit there and be able to control possession. And look, maybe that's what Pep will instill in him, right? Maybe that's what Pep, teaches and drills into Nico over the course of this season. And at Porto, he's been usually used as a kind of double pivot rather than someone at the base of midfield on his own. So it's not necessarily something that he's hugely used to in terms of what he's going to be asked to do here and be that lone number 6, that lighthouse figure. But I do really like the profile. Now, obviously, you come from playing limited-ish minutes at Barcelona. You have a nice loan spell at Valencia. You end up at Porto, and all of those things are important and impressive in their own right. They don't necessarily mean that you're going to walk into the Premier League and be able to shift gears straight away. But the Primera has got quite a good track record of bringing players into the Premier League and seeing them hit the ground running. And I'm really, really interested as to what Pep does here in terms of setting up his system, what Pep does with Nico in terms of what he's asking him to do as a role. But I think that you're absolutely right in terms of what you're saying about him being versatile enough to potentially play with Rodri once he responds and once he returns. Equally, there is an element with the whole Rodri thing that I think everyone's forgetting, is that people are talking about Rodri being back in April, maybe May. Even if Rodri is back to playing condition, shall we say, by April, May, Rodri might not be himself until December, January next year. We might not be seeing the version of Rodri off the back of an injury like this that we've come to expect for quite some time. It's not going to be immediate that he comes back and has that touch and that ability and that, control of a game that meant that he won the Ballon d'Or. So I am interested to see how Nico is used. But I think that from a profiling perspective, and look, bear in mind, he's someone that City tried to sign at the age of 14, I think, someone they tried again to sign at the age of 16, and someone they were very excited about as he was coming through La Masia, that at this point in his career, at 23 years old, having had serious senior experience both in La Liga and the Primera, that they're going to be able to bring him in and expect him to make a difference straight away. I don't know if that will be as the kind of lone midfielder. And interestingly, one of the things I think that's held City back this year is the fact that they can't suffocate teams because they're asking 2 players to do what Rodri has done. And therefore, there's not the extra player moving up the pitch who's able to put the squeeze on defenders. And actually, Arsenal did to them very, very well at the weekend. But I am pretty positive about this signing. And I think that Nico feels like the kind of player who might well succeed in terms of physicality he has, in terms of the ball control he has, in terms of the security and possession he has. I think that when they've gone and looked at a variety of options here, this felt like a smart one that no one else really paying attention to.
Yeah, 100%. I say it's transformative window. It has to be transformative and it has to be immediate. At the weekend, it's FA Cup action. So Man City have an away match against Leyton Orient, which they will win about 7-0 probably. But the fixtures that come after that, Real Madrid at home in the Champions League playoff. Then they've got a home match against Newcastle in the Premier League. And they've got an away tie against Real Madrid for the Champions League playoffs. Then they've got Liverpool at home in the Premier League. Then they've got Tottenham away in the Premier League. Like Man City already 5th in the Premier League. Man City already not expected to see off Real Madrid, so to go out of the Champions League. But this is their opportunity to change everything. Now, obviously, in this playoff stage of the Champions League, you are allowed to change your squad. You can register 3 new signings, right? So I would assume that means Marmoush, Kusanov, and Gonzalez.
Agreed.
Am I right?
Agreed.
It's got to be.
It's not going to be Victor Ice at this point.
So that gives them a chance. It gives them a chance. I mean, having those 3 players available, particularly Marmoush and Nico Gonzalez, gives them a fighting chance of being able to compete with Real Madrid. Like, I know we're not seeing the best version of Real Madrid, but Real Madrid are better than Man City at this point, definitely. And then you've got those Premier League matches, which Liverpool seems like they'll feel like they're playing uphill at times, probably. And as for Tottenham, obviously Tottenham have already done them once, so they'll be looking for revenge.
They don't need to beat Liverpool. Like, as in, they're not going to win the league. They need to beat the teams around them to try and secure Champions League football.
But they've got to win a big game at some point. You know, they're losing all the big games, Man City, and this isn't okay. Like, people aren't really talking about this enough. They beat the biggest. You know what they beat Chelsea twice.
The week.
They beat Chelsea twice.
That's
so
a genuine competitive game for the Champions League.
Yeah, but you can't lose 5-1 to Arsenal, 4-2 to PSG. Who else done them for 4? Tottenham obviously scored 4 against them. Sporting done them for 4. They lost to Man United. Like most Villa done them 2-1. Like most big games they go into, they lose them, and that's not okay. So that there is that point to prove, and Pep can't keep losing these tactical battles against like rivals. Like Man City are the reigning champions. Like they shouldn't be this bad. So also they got Echeverry to think about for the future, and Oscar Bob will be back in the mix reasonably soon. So that should give them another outlet as well.
Oscar Bob wasn't registered, I assume, for the Champions League. So is he going to be
one
of those?
I don't know for sure, but
is he too young to need to register? I don't know. Like I'm quite intrigued, but if they do, I wouldn't be hugely surprised if City didn't register Kusanov for the Champions League. I think they'll utilise him through the back half of this season in the Premier League. But if they had to make some decisions about who was where, I wouldn't be surprised if they left Kusanov out of that in order to try and allow themselves some more options in various areas. Because whilst their centre-back issues have been there, and there's nothing to kind of hide that, I do wonder if all of them are fit, if actually Kusanov ends up being sort of second choice in there for the time being, and therefore maybe isn't quite as necessary.
I'm not sure I'm okay even with the fact that you can change your team for the playoffs. I think it should personally kick it in the next bit, and when you're actually in the knockouts.
The playoffs are the knockout round, are they not?
But this is the league stage for me. Like this feels like this is still attached to the league phase. So you should still have the teams that you had there. Otherwise, like you can do what City are doing and just buy some better players for this bit. So I'm not okay with it, but it's not my decision.
All right, well, we'll work with that later. All right,
who's the don't worry.
Third and final team you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, this one's only going to be quick because I talk about them every week. But at number 3, I've just put late rescue deals to save the window. And again, Tottenham were talked about a team that had to try and win the window. And it didn't look great when they'd only signed Kinski, the goalkeeper, and they kept missing out on Kusanov or Dorgu or Colin Moani, and it looked like they'd missed out on Tell, and it looked like they were scrambling around. But in the final hours, they have managed to add Tell from Bayern Munich to their ranks, and they've also got in Kevin Danso as a defensive reinforcer. Danso is a loan that becomes a permanent transfer. Tell has the option of becoming a transfer, depending on how it goes for all parties. But ultimately, Jack, they have actually saved it, because they set out at the start of the window. I read like a preview that I wrote for the window, like what are they looking for? And it was like, the priority is a centre-back. And they'd also wanted another backup goalkeeper, especially obviously once Vicario was out. And they wanted a winger / centre forward. And they got a really good one. So in those 3 signings, bizarrely, they can argue that they've actually done really well. It's just all come a little bit late and a little bit scattergun.
Yeah, I mean, look, I feel like we should probably talk about the whole Matthias Tell thing, because the whole saga felt absolutely mad. From the point where he was said that he was going to be leaving Bayern, and basically, the sporting director came out and was like, yep, I've never had more offers ever in my entire life for a player than I have currently for Matthias Tell. The fact that pretty much all of the big clubs in the Premier League, bar Liverpool, looked like they were interested at one point to various degrees. The fact that he basically alluded to the idea that he might want to join Manchester United, and then they realised that they couldn't have the money to be able to do that, or that they didn't like the conditions set out by Bayern. The fact that Chelsea were interested, and he was like, nope, don't feel like I'm going to get enough minutes, and I'm not going there. The fact he turned down the permanent deal to Spurs, and then suddenly Ange Postecoglou was on the phone over the weekend, and they were looking at a loan deal, and then in the last minutes, Spurs managed to squeeze in an option to buy into the loan deal, which was not originally part of it, which is why Manchester United dropped out. Like, I don't think I've ever seen more of a mad selection of things happening in the same moment than we've seen with this whole Matthias Tell thing.
Yeah, no, I would agree with it. It is bizarre, especially the fact they did manage to get the option in. I mean, it is only an option, though. And at the end of the day, even if it was a dry loan, which it was going to be, in that moment, I spoke to Tottenham and I wrote a story about it for Give Me Sport. It was like, Tottenham still, I think I actually tweeted it, I think, rather than wrote about it. It was like, Tottenham still intend to make this a permanent signing. Like, this isn't what they want. Like, they'll do it. If this is the way to do it, then all they'll do over the following months is try to convince him that this is the place for him. And so there still would have been a possibility of signing him. And that hasn't really changed with an option, because you've still got to convince Tell. I mean, what you are giving him here is hopefully loads of game time. You're giving him the best training facilities and the best stadium in the whole of England, pretty much. And you're also giving him potentially a chance to be part of a team that wins a trophy. I mean, Tottenham have got a big game, obviously, this week in the semi-final. Depends when you're listening to this as to whether you know how well that goes or not when they play against Liverpool. But they are in the lead as we go into the second leg. I mean, do we trust that? Not really. I don't even trust Tottenham when they're winning a game at half time, let alone before a game starts. So we'll have to wait to see whether they can come out the other side of it. But, you know, there's a lot of reason that this can work for Tell. I have to admit, I still feel like the player doesn't fully want to leave Bayern Munich. And like, even if he does really well here at Tottenham, he might see it as, well, if I do really well, I can play for Bayern Munich again. So maybe I'm being cynical about that, but I kind of do get that impression. He didn't really want this transfer to happen, did he? Like, it was only when Man United pulled out that it came back on the table because he wanted to go there.
Yeah, I mean, there is an element, I imagine, that he really did want to go out and get minutes. Whether that meant he wanted to depart Bayern permanently or not, it is a different question. But I'm quite interested with this whole Ange Postecoglou getting on the phone and basically being like, look, this is how I see, you fitting into my system. This is where I foresee you getting minutes. This is what I think you can do with us. That intrigues me because I think that we all are quite aware that Ange, when he wants to be, but most of the time, I think he is quite a personable person. And you'd imagine that him speaking to you in a manner that he wanted to be your friend is probably quite a pleasant experience. But it does sort of hang over you. Like, you had to be convinced that this was the right move. Maybe that's just, the concept of where Spurs are right now, right? It's not necessarily, yes, you can talk about this amazing stadium and the incredible training ground, and I completely agree with you. And Spurs are a big club. But there is also an element that if Matthias Tell just went onto the old Premier League website last week and was like, who are the clubs interested in me? Like, oh, okay, so most of them are there challenging for Europe. Hang on, what? And, and imagine, the United thing, you could probably make the same argument for, right, in terms of where they are. But United carry a little bit more kind of a global brand than almost anybody else, right? So you can kind of take that with a pinch of salt. But I wonder if there was just an element of be like, I don't really get it. I don't really understand. But, I saw this being discussed yesterday on Deadline Day on Sky Sports, and I thought it was an interesting point. If you are a striker or you are someone who wants to be in and around the goals, Spurs must be the most incredible place for you to try and think about going, because the amount of chances that are created, the amount of space that opens up, the amount of goals in these games must be absolute bread and butter for someone who has the quality to put the ball in the back of the net.
Maybe, yeah, but then their first choice striker is always going to be Solanke. So
yeah, but Tell's versatility makes him quite an interesting option in that he can play off the left, he can play through the middle.
He does, but Son plays off the left.
That's fair enough, but
that's what I don't really understand.
Very poor season, right? And I wonder if there is an element of being like, okay, you can go in and get some mentorship from a player of Son's quality, but also potentially try and usurp his place in the side.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously, like Solanke's going to be missing for, I don't know, another month or probably longer. So it doesn't really matter at the moment because Solanke's not actually in the mix. And the only other centre forward they have is Richarlison, who deserves an opportunity to, probably one last opportunity to do this. And Son, as you say, isn't like the Sonny of old, but Son's going to start. There's no way Son's not starting games. So I just don't understand exactly where Tell is going to get these. I don't understand what Ange has actually said to him because I don't know where he's playing. And he's going to be playing, definitely. But be interesting. I mean, you've seen more of Tell than I would have seen, so you'll have a better idea of whether he should be playing through the middle or off the left.
I I think he can probably play either. Like at this point in his career, I think it's important for him to learn a variety of skill sets. I think that eventually he will end up as a number 9, but if he has to get minutes on the left at this point, that's probably okay as well. You know, if Bayern saw fit to play him in those roles, I don't think it's weird for Tottenham to not see fit to do the same. But I imagine for the time being, we're going to probably see him through the middle trying to make an impact as the 9 while Solanke is out.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Tell has actually just changed his Instagram profile. As someone's just tweeted, he's fully come on you Spurs now. So he's got full buy into this. He's looking to make a big impression. How soon we see him, we'll have to wait and see. As we sit here right now, he's waiting for a work permit to see whether he can take part in that Liverpool game. So, I mean, that would be the dream, right? Like, to have Tell available at Anfield is, well, it's very exciting for Tottenham fans. But as I say, you'll probably know by the time that you listen to this whether they've managed to get one over the line or not.
It's interesting because obviously the last time we were talking about Spurs in a game against Liverpool in this competition, in a semi-final, in the first leg, we were like, Kinski's come in 2 days ago, but there's absolutely no way he gives him the start. And then suddenly he's in goal and starting in that game. And you're like, oh, right. Okay, cool. It's all changed very, very quickly. But yeah, I think there's plenty for Spurs fans to be excited about with Matthias Tell. And I think that Kevin Danso is a smart, sensible signing to come in and give them some depth as well at fullback. So credit to Spurs. It took them far too long to get said deals over the line, but they have managed to bring in some reinforcements late in this window. All right, we're going to take a break there, and afterwards going to talk about a couple of the transfer windows that have caught my eye in Europe.
Reese's peanut butter cups are the greatest, but let me play devil's advocate here. Let's see. So, no, that's a good thing. That's definitely not a problem. Reese's, you did it. You stumped this charming devil.
Welcome back to Ranks FC. Jack, you are going to get us over the line here. Teach me something that I don't know about the European transfer windows.
Well, I'm quite intrigued by the fact that, you know, obviously we've seen City basically outspend the entirety of January 2024 on their own in the Premier League. And obviously
didn't La Liga, by the way, spend like €2 million or something this January or something?
I think La Liga might have made a profit in this January window.
Like nothing. There's nothing.
There's been almost no business in La Liga. There have been a couple of clubs who have been up to some things, and I will talk about one of them in a minute. But I'm quite intrigued by the fact that Serie A went a bit mad. To be perfectly honest with you, Serie A was the second highest spending league, or at least of the top leagues in Europe. And there was quite a lot of business. Obviously, right at the top, I spoke about AC Milan and the fact they brought in Santi Jimenez, they brought in Joao Felix, Ricardo Sotil, they brought in, as you said, Kyle Walker, and then Warren Bondo as well from Monza. So quite a lot from a kind of Milan perspective. They spent about 30 odd million pounds, $40 odd million. Juve went and brought in Renato Vega and Lloyd Kelly on loan. They brought in Randall Kolo Muani. That's quite a big change. They also brought in Alberto Costa. I'm quite intrigued by from Vitoria Guimaraes, who was very good, but also has a lot yet to prove at 21 years old. There are a few like interesting ins and outs at Atalanta, who brought in Daniel Maldini from Monza for 10 odd million. And they brought in Stefan Posch from Bologna, who was excellent last year under Thiago Motta at Bologna. And it's going to be intriguing to see what he looks like under Gasperini, but I think feels like a good pickup. And there's just been like more business, I feel, in Serie A than anywhere else, although quite a lot of it's for like lower fees than you might expect. But just a couple of random windows that have taken my eye. Fiorentina have been flipping players left, right, and centre. So in this window, they lost from a team who would these are players who started in the last 2 years. They lose Lucas Martinez Quarta, who has fallen out of favour a little bit, but was a big part of their centre-back core. They lose Jonathan Okone, who was chaos to Como. They lose Sotil to Milan. Michael Coyote, who was a starter at the start of the year, but has kind of fallen a little bit out of favour, 20 years old, very, very exciting talent. He's bought by Brentford, initially on loan, but that's going to be permanent. And Oliver Christensen, who came in and didn't really rip up any trees in goal, goes off to Salernitana, and club captain Cristiano Baraghi leaves for Torino on loan, and then Christian Kouame leaves for Empoli on loan. You're thinking, okay, that's quite a lot of players that have left. And then suddenly they go absolutely mad in the market. So they bring home Nicolo Zaniolo, who was on loan at Atalanta, who started his career at Fiorentina, has bounced around in Serie A for such a long period of time. He's still only 25. He comes in, he cancels his loan at Atalanta and comes in on loan from Galatasaray. Fagioli comes in on loan from Juventus. Pablo Mari comes in for a fee to cover that centre-back slot from Monza. They bring in Florencio from Napoli, who I think is a very, very exciting signing on loan. And then they bring in Sharon Dor, who is a fun 20-year-old player who was at Paris Saint-Germain and didn't really make too much of an impact, but I think it is potentially one for the future. That is so much business, Dean. Bear in mind that, we were talking earlier in this episode about the fact that Villa in the summer felt like they were flipping players for profit and basically moving them around in order to comply with regulations. Now, obviously, there are regulations in Serie A, but it's not quite the same in terms of how FFP and PSR work in the Premier League. Fiorentina have had pretty much a pretty good season, I think, on the whole. What we've seen from Fiorentina over the course of it, they haven't been perfect in the Conference League, but they've done more than enough. They're in Serie A, they've fallen away from the title race, but they're still very much in the hunt for Champions League, or at the very least, European football. This amount of upheaval feels really, really mad at a team that had felt relatively stable over the course of the first half of the season.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I did read a few messages of people being happy with the players that they had moved on. So I'm not going to claim that I've seen much of Fiorentina this season, because I obviously haven't. But there didn't seem to be that much dismay over it.
No. I'm not mad about it as someone who has a soft spot for Fiorentina, but equally, I'm a bit perplexed by the amount of movement. It felt relatively settled. Yes, they've had their ups and downs this season, really good runs and then really poor runs. But as a squad and under a new manager, it felt relatively settled. And then suddenly you're looking at it and going, oh, wow, obviously wasn't quite as settled as I thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, it certainly livened things up for them. And I guess you're taught that you've got to fight for your place, and that nobody's safe, maybe. But yeah, it's an interesting approach, and it's going to go one way or the other, right? It's either going to give them the ability to flip up into another gear, or it kind of destabilizes things as everybody gets to know each other.
Well, I wonder how it affects them in the Conference League, because if the rules are the same, which I assume they are, that they can only register 3 new players, that's going to be a scrap for places, isn't it? If they're like, oh, which of you are actually going to end up in this Conference League team that we want to go deep in and potentially lift? That's going to be intriguing. Also, at the bottom of Serie A, Monza currently in last place and looking not great for them. They're 8 points off safety right now. They also had an absolutely nutty window. Brought in, I think, 9 players, including some relatively well-known names. Akpa Akpro, who came in from Lazio. They brought in Kasper Urbanski, who was at Bologna and part of that Bologna side that did very well last season. Thomas Palacios, who's a youngster at Inter. Zaroli, a youngster at AC Milan. And then some experience as well in the form of Gaetano Castrovilli, who was released from Fiorentina in the summer and joined Lazio, but not to much avail. And you kind of look at that and you're thinking, okay, you might be bottom of the league. You also lost Bondo to Milan, which you mentioned, Maldini to Atalanta, and then Pablo Mari to Fiorentina. And it just all feels a bit wild, considering the fact that I don't know if they're just on the move to kind of spend all the money that they have before they end up being relegated, which looks incredibly likely at this point, or they've just decided that they're just going to have an absolute gamble on it and hope for the very best. But I thought it was worth bringing up. The other one is Como, who obviously have a fair bit of money behind them as a club, were promoted last year. And I think a lot of people thought we're going to struggle. There's some really interesting names at Como. We saw some people in and out already, the likes of Rafael Varane, who joined and then ended up retiring about 4 weeks into his career at Como. Cesc Fabregas is the manager, obviously. But they brought in Maxence Caqueret from Lyon, who I think is a phenomenal footballer. And I think I'm absolutely stunned that more
that's a good
clubs
signing, that.
weren't in for at 15 million euros. They brought in Asana Diao, who's a really, really exciting and highly rated youngster from Real Betis. And you're kind of looking at Alex Valle, who comes in on loan from Barcelona, was at Celtic in the first half of the season, didn't get all that much game time, but he comes in as an exciting talent. Jonathan Akone from Fiorentina, who's in the prime of his career at 26, absolute chaos merchant for what it's worth, but an interesting footballer to bring in. And Dele Alli, who signs on a free. Like, that is a window that you look at and just think, what on earth happened there?
Yeah, I mean, they're a fun team to now pick up as like a hobby, really, aren't they? A hobby team in Italy. Like, if you just want to start getting into it and you want to have a few players that you recognise and you want to see perform, but also cheer on an underdog, then that's the story to be at. They've done a very good job in recent years of kind of raising the profile. And I guess it's easier to entice people to join you when you've got the kind of setting that they have. Yeah. If you haven't seen where Como played their games, then I strongly suggest you go and have a quick flick through and see why they can entice these players to come play for them.
It's where George Clooney lives. I think that's probably enough description of why people join Clooney.
It's like
Como.
magnificent. It's magnificent. And yeah, if you can't play for Milan, go and play for Como, basically. So, yeah, it's an exciting one. Delhi, we'll wait and see. Like, would love to see this turn around, right? Who knows? It's a great place to try and get your head back on it, right? And get back to full fitness and under the tutelage of Fabregas, I guess, get that inspiration back as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just we spoke about La Liga and the fact that they've made a profit earlier, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. Betis have had a really Betis window. Right, they end up selling Asana Diao, which everyone was very upset about because he's a very exciting prospect. They end up selling Rui Silva, who was the starting goalkeeper for a long, long time. He leaves to go to Sporting. He decides he wants to go back to Portugal, which is kind of fair enough. The two players they bring in are Cucho Hernandez from Columbus Crew for 13 million euros, so about 15 million odd dollars. And who is 25 years old, had obviously spells in England with Watford, had spells in Spain before, but had really felt like he'd kind of excelled in MLS. He was twice an MLS All-Star. He was the MVP at MLS Cup when Columbus ended up lifting that in 2023. He was a big part of the reason that they won Leagues Cup in 2024. He's felt like the kind of player that could have been an MLS icon if he'd stayed there and been really one of the kind of poster boys, the faces of the league. And he makes a jump back to Betis, which I'm very, very excited about. But I'm also a bit worried about because he didn't have a great time of it in Europe, like flashes of brilliance, but equally, some frustrating moments as well. And I think he's really found somewhere that he thrived in MLS and especially at Columbus. So seeing him depart there was a bit of it was one of those things that may be a little bit sad, but seeing him in a Betis shirt, I think will be very, very exciting. And then obviously they bring in Anthony as well from Manchester United, who is...
How good was his debut, mate?
He was really good.
Was he actually?
Yeah, he was really good. Okay. Not like set the world on fire. He didn't, suddenly start like beating 8 players and squaring the ball, but he worked incredibly hard. He did all the things that you would expect, a new exciting winger to play. He looked like he could get round his man and make things happen. It was really sharp. And what? I was very, very impressed with how he kind of went about his business, considering that there were a lot of eyes on his debut. And you know what? I thought he lived up to it. Now, whether that continues or not is another question. But so far, so good from Anthony.
Yeah, good. I'd read, obviously, when you read about, you say he got man of the match and you're like, yeah, is this just PR? Is this just a glamour pick?
I don't think he was like, the absolute 100% standout man of the match, but I had no issues with him being given it either.
Okay, fair enough. Let's see if he can keep it up. He started well at Man United, so let's see what he can do going forward. But yeah, Betis back on the map, mate. You've talked about how Betis have been this season, and it seems like they could do with a bit of vavavoom in their season, let's say.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's exciting at the very least. There were no Anthony spins to report, so I'm delighted to let you know that. No, we can only do, Betis scored the winner very, very late on, so I'm assuming he can only do the Anthony spins when we're winning. So we'll see how we go. Just a word for Valencia, by the way, who obviously struggling towards the bottom of La Liga, and I've said it once, to say it 100 times. La Liga with a Valencia doing well is a better La Liga for absolutely everyone. And And the idea that they might be relegated should be anathema to anyone who loves football, considering the way that they've been treated by the board and their chairman in particular. But they had quite a busy window. They didn't spend anything, obviously, but they brought in Umar Sadiq from Real Sociedad on loan, who was, very exciting when he came in at La Real, but got an injury early on and never really lived up to the expectation. They brought in Max Aarons from Bournemouth on loan, which is one of those transfers you look at and go, what? How's that happened? And the other one was Ivan Jaime, who is a Porto player who came in. He's sort of a number 10-esque, kind of can drift around the front line. But that feels like a pretty big intake in terms of trying to make plays that might end up moving you up this table, players that might make impacts at the right end of the pitch. So I was quite happy about Valencia's business, considering the predicament they find themselves in and the fact that they clearly weren't going to spend any money. They've done well enough, I think, considering with all that put into consideration.
Yeah, very good, mate. Very good.
There you go. That's my little roundup of things that interest me across the course of Europe. So, Serie A, by having players going left, right, and centre, like everyone moving in Serie A between each other by the looks of it, and then La Liga doing absolutely nothing apart from a couple of teams who are like panicking. So that's the roundup from the rest of Europe.
Yeah, love it. And if you're on Patreon, thank you for all your contributions throughout the month. We had the Transfers from Paradise newsletter going out, which
9 editions in the end.
9 editions, yeah. Thought about putting out a 10th on deadline day, but it would have gone out of date too quickly, so didn't go ahead with that. But might carry on with the old newsletters. That was quite a soothing thing to put together in the evenings. But yeah, if you do fancy joining us on Patreon, then the link will be below, and you can get involved with us. We have at least 2 episodes a week for you to get into, and we are going to introduce more stuff throughout this year as part of the membership scheme that we have going for Ranks FC's. What do we call them? I'm going to say
Poets,
elites here, but
melons.
Yeah, poets, melons, but basically the ultras. So if you consider yourself an avid fan of this pod, then we'd love to have you over on the Patreon.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, I think it's probably time for us to call it a day. So all that's left for me to do is say thank you very much to Mr. Dean Jones.
Cheers, mate.
I've been Jack Collins. This has been Ranks FC. There's not going to be a truth this week because Sam is ill. So that will return next week, talking about some of the managers across Europe that probably require some more attention. So take a well-earned break from the truth for the time being. But Dean and I will be back over on the Patreon doing our Friday Fiesta as ever if you need more Ranks content. But for now, thank you so much for listening as ever, and we'll see you very shortly, Ranks Squad. Take it easy. Peace.
If this were a Reese's TV ad, you'd be staring at a Reese's peanut butter cup. And sure, my voice is peanut buttery smooth, but still, you need to see the peanut butter cups, right? No? I can really just say Reese's and you'll go get some? Okay, Reese's. Really working, actually. Reese's. I'm on to something. Reese's.